You are muted, Professor, in case you forgot. Yes, you are. Yeah, still can't hear you, surprisingly.
I don't think she's muted. I think there's something wrong with her computer.
Is that better?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I unplugged it and I plugged it back in. All right.
The number one IT solution right there.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Okay. So I'll start again. Good morning or good afternoon. Welcome back. I thought you guys might get a kick out of this cartoon because, you know, it's a lot like what our government is saying about dealing with the current COVID pandemic. It's too expensive. Where if we would spend the money, you know, we could at least significantly reduce the death toll. Now, COVID is our topic for the day. All right, so the first quiz is on Blackboard, and that's due Sunday before midnight. It's mostly a quiz about you. So you don't need to study for this one. It's a nice, easy quiz. I've also given you your first journal prompt. Journal entries, I do want them to show some depth of thinking. So I do ask for them to be 12 sentences or more. But you don't have to bring in references or anything like that. These are topics that you should be able to think about based on what you already know, your own experiences, and what we've talked about in class. And I do have a reading assignment that we're going to talk about in class next Tuesday. So make sure you look at that one. So COVID-19. We're all pretty familiar with this one by now. And I don't know about you, but I've had a couple of COVID tests. I've had the ones that feel like they're tickling your brain. If you never have to get one of those, great, you're lucky. They're horrible. So this is a picture. I think the original title is St. George and the Slaying the Dragon or something, but you know, kind of looks like he's testing it for COVID. So there's still a lot we don't know about this disease. And so some of the stuff I'm telling you now, it's our best understanding, but some of it's probably wrong. And as we do more studying and research and understanding, some of the things I tell you are going to be corrected. That's kind of how science works. Usually the average layperson doesn't see that going on. But of course, nowadays we're all interested in this. So we are just about at the 2-year point since the first COVID death. At this point, 2 years ago, there might have been a couple of cases in Oregon, but it wasn't really in the US very much yet. Now, worldwide, there have been 300 million cases. Really big number. That is 4% of everybody on the planet. This is probably a serious underestimate. A lot of places don't have good testing or good reporting. And it doesn't take into consideration people who are asymptomatic with COVID or don't have very much in the way of symptoms and don't go get tested or test themselves at home. I mean, if you do a test at home, you don't have to report it to anybody. Nobody's going to know. Worldwide, there's somewhere between 5 and 22 million people have died in the past 2 years. This is a huge range because, again, we really don't have a good way to get this information from everywhere on the planet. Nate, you raised your hand?
I did. I want to be careful with my words here because I don't want to sound obtuse. But I think when you look at the death numbers, there is a lot of things that are unknown. Like you mentioned, that data that we just don't know yet or may be skewed. But are these deaths counting people who died directly from COVID or people who had conditions that were exacerbated by COVID? I don't know if you're getting the train of where I'm going with this.
Yeah. Did they die because of COVID or did they die from something else with COVID?
They had a car accident and they died with COVID. So
Right. Well, car accidents, that's not going to be in here. Nobody's going to test you post-mortem if you died from something like a car accident. If you had a heart attack and went into the hospital, that's a different question. And it's complicated because I see we've got 2 hands up. I'll get to you in just a second. If you had a heart attack, was COVID a contributing factor? So that's a concern. Jerry, you got your hand up.
Well, I akin, I forget what his name was, I'm sorry. I akin the whole secondary death or firsthand death thing with HIV. You don't die from HIV, right?
Right.
So they still say you die from HIV.
Yeah, you die.
I thought now they had like medicine, so like if you have HIV, you don't die from it anymore. Like they can
No, right. You're right about that. But we're going back to what was his name, Professor? I'm sorry.
Nate.
Nathan. So we're going back to what Nathan's saying about the numbers being inflated or just, not totally true.
I don't know if they're inflated. I just don't know if they're represented properly.
Cheers. So I'm saying that with HIV, because you can have like, you could be obese or have some lung problems and then COVID exacerbates it and then you die, but you're still dying because of COVID.
Right. I think comorbidities, I think that's the term for it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Jerry.
No, go ahead. No. So right, I'm just trying to connect what you're saying to the HIV thing because you don't die from HIV. So I'm just trying to make that connection.
Right. It weakens your immune system and you die from another disease, but you don't have the antibodies or natural defense to fight it off. So yeah, right. I would agree with that. So I agree with that sentiment. Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Yeah, Jerry's exactly right. One of the things that COVID does to the body is it causes clotting, and blood clots in your heart can exacerbate heart disease. In your brain, they can trigger strokes. In your kidneys, they can cause your kidneys to fail. So dying of COVID versus dying with COVID, there's not that much of a difference if we're not talking about car accidents. What we do know, one of the ways that we get this data, and that's not well explained, is we look at something called excess mortality. So in the US, we are rapidly approaching 900,000 deaths that we can say are definitely related to COVID because this person had COVID. But if we look at what's called excess deaths, we're over 1.2 million. So what happens, how we do this is we look at the death rate. How many Americans died in 2018 and 2019 and 2017? And then we look at, okay, what is the estimate for how many Americans would die in 2020 and 2021? And we see a gap. We see 1.2 million more deaths than we predict. So 900,000 are directly attributable to COVID. The rest of them, some of those are going to be COVID that weren't reported. We know some parts of the country, especially early in the pandemic, would not report deaths as COVID deaths. They would put something else on the death certificate. But we also see increases in other types of death. We are seeing increases in drug overdoses. We're seeing increases in suicides. We're seeing people who die of other conditions because the hospitals are so crowded that they can't treat people as well as we're used to being treated by our healthcare system. So when we say excess deaths, we're saying these people died maybe not necessarily because they had COVID, but because we're having a pandemic. Does that kind of clear things up a little bit there, Nate?
Yeah, I can, I get what you're saying, like due to hospital shortages, people couldn't get life-saving surgeries or kidney transplants or a dire medical attention that they needed. Yeah, that makes sense. I like how you explained it when you compared it with statistics from previous years. I think that helps it make a little bit more sense. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay. When we look at the current situation in the United States, we have better data from the United States than we have from, say, countries in Africa and Asia, Russia. Those countries we don't have as good data from. In the US, around 25% of us have had COVID. So again, we're looking at confirmed cases and kind of estimating the rest of that. And right now, about 10% of America has COVID right now, which is huge. It's really a big issue. When we look at this 900,000 deaths that we can say for sure are COVID in the US, to get a perspective, that is 1 out of every 300 Americans. So for every 300 Americans that were alive in 2019, 1 has died because of the pandemic. I'm hoping you're getting the impact of this. This is a big, big deal. Now, I did mention we don't have enough testing to know how many people have been asymptomatic or have had mild symptoms. We don't have great numbers to understand how transmissible it is because we don't have good numbers on asymptomatic people, or fatality rate. What percentage of people with COVID die from COVID? What we do know about those things, we know that my cat's got a new toy this morning and they've decided to play with it in my office instead of somewhere else in the house. So if you see me looking over my shoulder, that's what's going on. where was I? We don't have enough testing to have good numbers. But what we can say, we can talk about something called R naught and RE. E stands for effective. And we do have estimates for this. What these numbers represent. R is the base reproductive rate. What that means is how many people one infected person passes the disease on to. So to give you an idea of some of these numbers, R naught for flu is about 1 to 2. For measles, it's between 12 and 18. That's one of the reasons why people who are in medicine and epidemics kind of freak out a little bit about measles because it spreads really, really rapidly. The original strain of COVID was about 2.5. So it spreads worse than flu does. And Omicron, which we all know has been insane, we're estimating it around a 7, which means that every person infected with Omicron passes it on to 7 other people. It's a measure of how contagious something is. Now, Nate, yes.
How do they figure out this data? I'm guessing they look at cases as a whole and some kind of sabermetric, but I'm not sure. I'm just curious as to how they can boil it down to a number like that.
Yep. You look at cases on a day-by-day basis, and it is an estimate. It is an estimate, but if you look at the number of cases today and you look at the number of cases next Thursday, you can kind of get an idea of how much that can kind of give you an estimate of the R.
In terms of like what's it called? An exponential like growth or spread of the virus. Am I making sense there?
Yeah, you're kind of thinking on the right path there. So if we've got 100 cases of Omicron, let's say in Joplin, Missouri today, it takes about a week before symptoms tend to show up. So if next week we have 700 cases in Joplin, Missouri, that gives you an R of 7. You have to take into account when symptoms show up. Does that clear things up a little bit there, Nate?
Yeah, it helps me gain a further understanding. I mean, I don't think it's going to be like ABC, but I can kind of see how they can arrive to that point. So yeah, that does help. Thank you.
Yeah, it's not an absolute value. It's a way to compare diseases to each other.
I'd say that's fair. That's a fair assessment.
Yeah. Now, we've seen all of these horrible numbers. If we compare this to other pandemics, it is in the top 10. We are in one of the top 10 worst recorded pandemics in history. But if we think about HIV was definitely much worse. HIV, I don't have it written down, but this is the number off the top of my head, between 30 and 60 million deaths in the US. Nate.
Sorry to keep hogging the conversation, but when you talk about HIV, does that also fall under the umbrella of AIDS too, since they are directly related?
Yes, HIV
Okay.
is the virus that causes AIDS.
Right.
Yes. And it's not as bad yet as the 1918 flu pandemic. You may have heard about this one. A lot of people are comparing COVID to that particular one. We are going to talk about this, that pandemic a little bit later, but it killed a higher percentage of the population than COVID has so far. Now, if we don't get our shit together, COVID has the potential to become worse than the 1918 flu. I do not think it's going to get as bad as HIV/AIDS, and it's not going to be as bad as the Black Death, which killed off an estimated third of the whole planet population in just a few years. All right.
Professor, so you're saying, is that the Spanish flu from 1918 or just the flu?
That's what is called the Spanish flu, yes.
Okay, cheers. Because I'm like, so what happened to the regular flu? How come people are not dying at that level? So it's the Spanish flu. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And we'll talk about why Spanish flu is not a good word for it. Because it didn't come from Spain. It first showed up in Kansas. So it should be called the Kansas flu if you want to talk about it that way. But we'll get to that. So what could we do to reduce COVID in the US? What can you guys think about that we can do? You can
Well, the
comment.
vaccination mandate just went in, Saturday the 15th? You can't even go eat or work out or do any social things in Boston without a vax card. So that's a great step.
Yep. Unfortunately, the federal mandate was struck down.
Meaning?
The Supreme Court shut it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had a vaccine mandate for big businesses, and the Supreme Court shut it down.
So I can go to Boston and eat without a vax card?
I think that's a state mandate.
Yeah, it's a state.
I
I think I honestly think that as long as there are some people out there that like they just aren't getting the vaccine because they don't like being told what to do. That's just my opinion. Like as long as the government tells them to do something, they're not going to do it. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion.
Yeah, it's definitely been politicized.
I wish we could do another lockdown, like a nice long one, maybe paid, maybe give people food or something. I think that would maybe help, but like no one is talking about another lockdown. I don't see it happening.
Biden just said this morning, or was it yesterday? No lockdown.
I think that's the right idea, to be honest. But like I said, I don't want to get too involved, but I don't think the lockdowns are really effective. And, you know, in the long run, it hurts us economically. I mean, you could couple that with COVID too, with the inflation, but I think eventually it's going to be endemic, and there will be, what do they say, the new normal or living with COVID. I think that's what's going to happen. But unfortunately, it's sad.
Yeah. Nate, I want to come back to how your comment about economics. Lockdowns, countries that have done lockdowns, and there are countries that have done them, have had fewer deaths per capita than the US. So they do save lives. And I would argue that the economics of having over 1 million Americans die in a 2-year time period is worse than the economics of shutting down the country for 2 weeks. you thought about that?
I don't want to, I'm kind of like teetering here because I don't want to, like, you know, with how crazy political arguments can get. And I don't want to say the wrong thing or offend anyone, but I just think, you know, it started off as 2 weeks to slow the curve. And I get it, like no one knew what was going to happen. You know, there's no long-term data on COVID, but
Nope.
I think another important argument, and I'm not disputing the fact that other countries, it was successful. Like I know Singapore, they were highly successful with their lockdowns. Their vaccination program is stellar, but it's hard to compare countries to each other because there's several different factors. And, you know, just overall, like, you know, you can't really compare America to a small, like, Asian country or a country like Scotland or Luxembourg or something like that. But what I would counter your argument with is the effects of lockdowns in terms of drug usage increase, depression, suicide, you know, kids with remote learning, it's damaging, you know, for them growing up socially, emotionally. I think there's a lot you have to consider. And I don't know, maybe we'll look ahead 2 years from now and be like, you know what, maybe the lockdowns were wrong, or maybe it'll be the inverse. You know, I just think there hasn't been enough time, and that's my philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, you do have some good points there. Absolutely. Locking down does cause a lot of problems mentally for people, and it certainly is inhibiting learning, especially for younger children. So those are valid points.
Thanks. I like that we can have that, you know, conversation, and it can be respectful. That's what I'm all about. So thank you.
You're welcome. Any other ideas about things we could do?
More masks, but
Yeah, masks.
right now they're handing out 4 free. Sorry, Megan, I didn't mean to steal your thunder there. But yeah, I know the government's handing out 4 free N95 masks. I think that's a good idea. I lived in Japan for 4 years, and you'd always see people on the public transportation wearing masks, and it was pretty effective in combating like seasonal flu over there and other airborne illnesses. But they have to be that secure N95 mask. Another thing, there's been a lot of like going back and forth on whether cloth masks work or whether they're not. I think there needs to be conciseness, but maybe there wasn't enough data to make that decision. So that's what I would say.
I got an easy test for that. If you can put a lighter in front of your mask and blow it out, then it's not a good enough mask.
Don't you think that there has to be enough filtration for these tiny microscopic viral particles?
No, of course. I'm saying, but I mean, that's an easy thing for you. We can't encompass everything, Nate. We're not gonna, it's impossible. 100% doesn't exist if you expand time so long. So the point that I'm saying to you is we can only do what we can do. So if we go from like C-level mass to B-level mass and A being the highest, that's better.
Yeah, I think that's valid. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yep. Okay, Megan, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, so I was going to say masks as well as Nate, but another thing is the at-home tests. And it's funny, I saw your notification as I was filling it out because my boyfriend messaged me. He's like, "Oh yeah, go get your at-home tests." So
yeah, that would help if we had more of them, because right now I think they're shipping 4 to every household. And for me, there's 2 people in our household, and my husband gets tested every week at work. So that's not a big deal for us.
Wait, everyone's getting 4 tests?
You have to fill out a form online.
It's
Okay.
from the post office, I believe.
Yep. There's a link on Blackboard.
I think it's 4 per household, right?
Yes. Regardless of how many people live there. Alexis.
Mine kind of relates to the at-home test kits, but also like I work at a daycare, and I think that parents should be like paying attention to their, or not paying attention, but like this kid came to the daycare with a fever and I have COVID now because he had a fever and the parents didn't realize, but I think they should like pay extra attention right now to children because you don't really know. They can't tell you because he's one. But he was crying all day and we had no idea. So eventually we took his temperature and sent him home and he tested positive. But then that spread to 2 other children at the daycare, including me.
Mhm.
So I just think that children are a very big, not problem, but we have to pay more attention to them because they don't really know what's happening.
Right. That's one thing we lack in this country is sick leave, especially the so-called essential workers. We don't have a lot of paid sick leave. If you take sick leave, you don't get paid. That's a problem. And I know Nate doesn't like to compare to other countries, but we really, really suck when it comes to this one compared to most of the world. Juliana, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, it was more just like a comment on the at-home testing, how like it's 4 per household. Like personally, I don't agree with that. That was basically it, but people already spoke upon it.
Okay. Nate, you raised your hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to offer a quick retort if I could. I think everything is like a case by case scenario. I think there are things you can compare with other countries, but I just take into factor population size, ruralness, because I was looking at COVID numbers in Africa and they're extremely low, but then at the same time, who knows how much they're testing? How much are they reporting? So those are like things I take into mind, not,
Yeah.
I didn't mean on like a socialistic kind of thing. I wasn't talking about that, just viral response.
Yeah.
That was,
You're correct about that. A lot of places, a lot of the countries in Africa are impoverished and are probably not doing a lot of testing, but we do have relatively good data coming out of some of the more developed African countries. And it does seem that they are having lower rates of COVID and fewer deaths. We don't know why. It's actually something that a lot of epidemiologists are very, very interested in. It may be that there's a genetic difference, quite possibly related to other diseases that have occurred in Africa that have not spread outside of Africa very much, but we don't know.
I like the accessibility of the test, but isn't there a period of time after you can get it where you can still spread it, but you might not test positive yet? So when
Yes.
people are taking tests all the time before they go out and do stuff or see their friends or go travel, they could still be spreading COVID. I want to say it's like a 5-day period. I have no idea, but you can still be positive and not test it.
You're absolutely right, Catherine. Absolutely right there. Especially Omicron, the at-home test kits are not as accurate with that in the early days of that, of being infected and contagious. Yeah. How about, let me rephrase this, clear messaging from like the CDC, the government. Some of the confusion is related to the fact that we don't know some of these things. Do fabric masks protect us? They certainly help. They're not as good as surgical masks. Do surgical masks protect us? They're not as good as KN95 masks. KN95 masks help. They're not as good as N95 masks. And of course, not interacting with anybody is the best but that's not very practical. But yes, the message coming out from the CDC and the government has been unclear. And part of that problem is it has become a political issue, which is so frustrating because we have ideas of good things that we can do, but we have people who are saying no masks, no test kits, no lockdown. Oh, if we just, tough it up, it's only going to kill the weak. Which I don't think that's an okay thing to say. I don't think that we should sacrifice people who have pre-existing conditions or are elderly so that the rest of us don't have to wear masks in public. Nate.
I think I saw a statistic. It was from Rochelle Walensky. I believe that's her name, the director of the CDC, that I think it was 75% of COVID deaths, the people had 4 comorbidities at least. So I don't know if that's good, bad, or what kind of information that really tells us, other than people who have compromising conditions are the ones, unfortunately, meeting their demise.
That's true. But more than half of all Americans have something that would be considered a comorbidity. I mean, one of the comorbidities is being overweight. And we know that a lot of Americans are overweight. If you've got asthma, absolutely. Lung conditions make you very vulnerable to COVID. But I mean, she's including things like arthritis, age, diabetes, which is really common in the US. So that number, while probably accurate, might be a bit deceptive if we're saying half of the population has comorbidities. All right. So this image down here is an electron micrograph. It's false color. They put color in it so we could see it better. This is COVID-19, the virus. You see all these little spikes on the surface? When we start talking about vaccines, our vaccines help our immune system recognize these spikes that are sticking out on the surface. Okay. So I don't know if you guys can, well, I can tell you what that one is. Okay. So when we compare respiratory viral infections, I talked about the R0, the basic reproductive number, and you can see this is the R0 for the first wave, and Omicron is now up to 7. So that kind of gives you a comparison. SARS and MERS are also coronaviruses. They are related to COVID. And we have had outbreaks of these in the past. You may or may not have been aware of these outbreaks, but they were kind of warning signs that coronavirus could break out in a more severe form and cause more severe diseases and spread faster than typical coronaviruses. Coronaviruses, we've all had some coronaviruses. It's one of the viruses that cause common colds. So it's related to the common cold. The case fatality rate, flu kills between 30 and 50,000 Americans every winter. But percentage wise, as far as how many people who are infected die from it, it's not very high. This number is from March of 2020, so that's not accurate anymore. So it's not 3% of people with COVID-19 die from it. The current numbers vary depending on whether you're vaccinated or not. If you're vaccinated, the case fatality rate is much, much lower than that. It's unusual for people who are vaccinated to die from COVID. You can still get sick. You can still end up with some of the long-term effects, but it's not this rate. SARS, the mortality rate was between 10 and 11%, which is huge, right? 1 out of every 10 people who got that died from it. MERS was even worse. Over a third of people who got this disease died from it. Fortunately, we were able to stomp it out very quickly. It came out and became an issue in 2014. And because it was so deadly and it was deadly quick, it didn't have the opportunity to spread very much. SARS was in 2003. More people were infected, but again, it was kind of quashed pretty quickly. We look at the hospitalization rate. Around 2% of people with flu have to be hospitalized. With COVID, again, the rate varies based on your vaccination status. If you've been vaccinated, it's going to be miserable. It's going to be hard. It's going to be worse than the flu, but you probably aren't going to need to go to the hospital. SARS and MERS, pretty much everybody had to. And I just looked at the clock, and we're just about done for the day. We will talk next time about what exactly COVID does to the body, how it started, how it spreads. You might have an idea of this one already. We've talked about a lot of things that can reduce your risk, and we'll talk about the vaccination. Does anybody have any questions or comments about what we covered today? Nate, go ahead.
I just wanted to say I thought there was great dialogue, and I enjoyed everyone that contributed to the conversation. And yeah.
Megan.
Yeah, I agree with Nate first, but I was just going to ask about the assignments. So I kind of held off on doing the journal, that's due this Sunday, to kind of see if the class content kind of related to it, which, I have more information, but I just kind of looked over the vocabulary words. I forget what it was called, but I just kind of looked over them, and I didn't know if that would be covered in the class. If some of the terms in there were just information that we learned today. I was just going to study them ahead of time for, the test that's weeks from now, but
yeah, the terminology and concepts pages come straight out of my lecture notes. So this is what I thought we'd get through today, and that's what we got through today. So we will cover those other terms and concepts before you get a quiz on them. Don't worry about that.
I have a question.
Yes.
What is the RE number versus the R0, the R effective number?
That is a great question. Can I explain that next time? Because we're already
Yeah.
over
that's
the
okay.
limit. So I will explain that
Okay.
next time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, if that's it, everybody have a good weekend. Stay safe, wear your masks, and I'll see you on Monday.
Take care,
Bye,
Professor.
thank
Lee.
you.
Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.